All right, so are you ready to, like, ditch the phrase book and actually speak English?
Yeah.
Like, confidently chat with someone at a cafe, nail that presentation, maybe even drop a witty joke or two. Ambitious. Absolutely. But we're here to help. We found this video claiming you can make serious progress in just 1 month. And while I'm a bit skeptical about that timeline,
Yeah.
the strategies they lay out are pretty intriguing.
I think what catches my attention is they don't just promise fluency.
Right.
They actually give you a roadmap breaking down actionable steps that you can start using right away.
Okay, so first up, they hit on the importance of setting clear goals.
Yeah.
But they're not talking about vague things like be better at English. They're getting specific, like being able to hold a 5-minute conversation or learning 20 new words per week.
And there's a reason for that level of detail.
Yeah.
Research actually shows that when we set specific measurable goals, we're far more likely to achieve them. It's almost like giving your brain a clear target to aim for.
Yeah.
Plus, imagine the feeling of accomplishment when you hit those milestones. That can be incredibly motivating, pushing you to keep going.
That totally makes sense. It's like when I decided to learn how to play the guitar, just saying I want to play guitar wasn't enough.
Right.
I need to break it down. Learn 3 chords this week, practice for 20 minutes each day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how does that translate to something like conversational practice?
Well, the video suggests a few cool tools, like apps like Tandem or HelloTalk,
Yeah.
which connect you with native English speakers. It's a way to get real-world practice, even if you're not living in an English-speaking country.
I've heard of those apps, but haven't tried them myself. Do they really work?
The effectiveness really depends on how you use them.
Okay.
Just passively chatting might not move the needle much,
Yeah.
but if you're intentional, using new words you've learned,
Right.
actively correcting your mistakes, that's where the real learning happens.
So it's about being an active participant, not just hoping that the app will magically make you fluent.
Exactly. And the video also mentions the value of in-person interactions, like meetups or conversation clubs. There's something about navigating real-time conversations that can really push your comfort zone and accelerate your progress.
I can see that. It's like the difference between practicing your dance moves in front of a mirror and actually going out dancing with a partner.
Right. And then there's this technique they call shadowing, which I find particularly fascinating.
Yeah, they made it sound kind of intense, like you're literally following someone's every word. What's the point of that?
It's actually more about training your ear and your tongue to work together
Okay.
by mimicking the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of native speakers. Think of someone like a compelling podcast host or a public speaker. You start to internalize those subtle nuances that make your English sound more natural and effortless.
So it's less about memorizing what they're saying and more about picking up the music of the language.
Exactly. It's almost like training your ear to hear the subtle shifts in tone and emphasis, and then training your mouth to replicate them.
Yeah.
It can do wonders for your pronunciation and make you sound more confident and fluent.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. I might have to try that myself. Now let's talk about vocabulary. I mean, you can't really speak a language if you don't know the words, right?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
A robust vocabulary is like the building blocks of fluency. And the video actually had some interesting suggestions for expanding yours.
They mentioned the classic learn a new word every day approach, but I feel like I've tried that before and the words just never seem to stick. Any tips for making it more effective?
The key is to move beyond simple memorization.
Right.
They recommend using tools like flashcards or apps like Anki,
Right.
which leverage something called spaced repetition.
Wait, spaced repetition, what's that?
It's a learning technique that's designed to help you remember information more effectively.
Right.
Basically, the app shows you a word or a phrase and then tests you on it at increasing intervals.
Oh,
So if you get a word right, you'll see it less frequently.
gotcha.
But if you struggle with it, it'll pop up more often, forcing you to engage with it until it's truly locked in your memory.
So it's kind of like your own personal vocabulary trainer.
Yeah.
Constantly adapting to what you know and what you need to work on. It's pretty cool.
Right. And it takes the guesswork out of studying.
Yeah.
The app does the heavy lifting,
Uh-huh.
making sure you're focusing on the words that need the most attention.
Okay, that's way more sophisticated than the old school flashcards I used to use.
Right.
But memorizing words is only part of the equation, right?
Yeah,
You also need to know how to use them in actual conversations.
you're absolutely right. And that's where the idea of context comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The video emphasizes the importance of learning new words in context, not just as isolated definitions.
So instead of just memorizing the word ubiquitous, I need to see it used in a sentence like, smartphones have become ubiquitous in modern society.
Okay.
That way you're not just learning the word itself. You're learning how it functions grammatically.
Yeah.
The kind of situations where it's used and the subtle shades of meaning it can convey.
It's almost like learning a new dance move. You need to see how it fits into the entire choreography.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And as you encounter those words and phrases in different contexts, they'll start to become more familiar and easier to use naturally in your own conversations.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about cramming vocabulary or memorizing grammar rules. It's about building a holistic understanding of the language, both in its structure and how it's actually used in real-world situations.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about developing a sense of the language's rhythm, its nuances, and its cultural context.
Okay, this is already making me rethink how I approach language learning. But before we get too carried away, I'm curious to hear what you think about the next big strategy they emphasized, immersion.
Ah, immersion. Now we're getting to the fun part. I have to admit, the idea of surrounding myself with English 204/7 sounds a bit daunting.
Yeah.
Especially since I don't live in an English-speaking country.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
It's about finding ways to integrate English into your daily life in a way that feels enjoyable and sustainable.
Okay, so how do we make immersion a reality without booking a one-way ticket to London? What kind of practical things can we do?
That's where a bit of creativity comes in. Think about things you already enjoy doing.
Right.
Watching movies, listening to music, scrolling through social media,
Uh-huh.
and find ways to do those things in English.
So instead of watching the latest rom-com with subtitles in my native language, I should switch them to English.
Exactly. Or even better, try watching with no subtitles at all. It might feel challenging at first, but you'll be surprised how quickly your brain starts to pick up on patterns and infer meaning from context.
I guess it's kind of like working out a muscle. The more you challenge yourself, the stronger you become.
That's a great way to think about it. And don't underestimate the power of passive listening.
Okay.
Put on an English podcast while you're cooking dinner.
Uh-huh.
Listen to English music while you're working out. You're essentially immersing your brain in the sounds of the language, even if you're not actively paying attention to every word.
You know, I've actually started doing that recently. I put on English language news while I'm getting ready in the morning.
Yeah.
And even though I don't catch everything, it's amazing how much more comfortable I'm becoming with the rhythm and intonation of the language.
See, those small changes can make a big difference over time.
Right.
And speaking of changes, let's talk about how our brains actually adapt to learning a new language.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Okay, brain science, I'm all ears.
Well, imagine your brain as a network of interconnected pathways.
Okay.
Every time you learn a new word or a grammatical structure, you're essentially forging a new connection in that network.
So the more connections we build, the easier it becomes to navigate the language.
Yeah.
Kind of like creating shortcuts in our brain.
Exactly. And repetition is key here. The more you revisit those pathways, the stronger and more ingrained they become.
That makes sense. It's like practicing a dance routine.
Yeah.
The more you rehearse, the smoother and more automatic the movements become.
I love that analogy. And that's why consistent practice is so important in language learning. It's not just about cramming information into your brain. It's about building those neural pathways and strengthening them through repeated use.
So it's not enough to just passively listen to a podcast or watch a movie.
Right.
We need to actively engage with the language, using the words and structures we're learning in real-life situations.
You've got it. And that's where strategies like shadowing and conversational practice become so valuable. They provide that active engagement that our brains crave.
You know, this whole conversation is making me realize that learning a new language is way more than just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. It's almost like rewiring your brain to think in a different way.
That's a profound insight. It's about developing a new way of perceiving the world, a new lens through which to experience different cultures and connect with people on a deeper level.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
It really is. And speaking of mind-blowing,
have
you ever thought about how our emotions can influence our learning process?
Not really. I guess I've always associated learning with logic and reasoning, not so much with feelings.
It turns out that our emotions play a much bigger role in learning than we might realize. Our brains are wired to remember things that are emotionally charged, whether it's a moment of triumph or a moment of embarrassment.
Okay, so that explains why I still remember that time I accidentally told a waiter in Spain that I wanted to eat his shirt instead of ordering a salad. My face was so red.
Exactly. Those moments, while cringeworthy at the time, can actually become powerful learning opportunities.
So the next time I make a language blunder, instead of shrinking in shame, I should embrace it as a chance to solidify that knowledge in my brain.
Precisely. It's all part of the process. And speaking of process, let's talk about some of the challenges people might encounter on their language learning journey.
I have to admit, motivation has always been my Achilles heel. I'll start a new language with tons of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But then life gets in the way and I lose steam. Any advice for staying motivated when the going gets tough?
Motivation is definitely key, and it often comes down to finding your why.
My why? You mean, like, why am I learning this language in the first place?
Exactly. What are your goals? What do you want to be able to do with this new language? Is
Okay.
it to travel the world, connect with family members who speak a different language,
Right.
advance your career?
It sounds so obvious when you put it that way,
Yeah.
but I guess I've never really thought about it that deeply. I just kind of figured, hey, speaking English would be cool.
And it is cool, but having a clear sense of purpose can make all the difference when you're facing those inevitable moments of frustration or self-doubt.
So if I'm feeling discouraged, I should remind myself of why I started this journey in the first place. It's like having a motivational pep talk from my future self.
Exactly. And it's also helpful to break down those big, daunting goals into smaller, more achievable steps.
Okay.
Celebrate those small wins along the way. Mastering a new grammar rule, having a successful conversation, understanding a movie without subtitles.
Yeah.
Those little victories can fuel your motivation and keep you moving forward.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We need to focus on those steps one at a time, rather than getting overwhelmed by the enormity of the task.
And remember, it's okay to have off days. There will be times when you're super motivated,
Right.
and others when you just don't feel like studying. That's
Yeah.
perfectly normal.
Okay.
The key is to be kind to yourself, acknowledge those feelings, and then gently nudge yourself back on track.
I think that's something I need to hear more often. I tend to be pretty hard on myself,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to learning new things. But maybe it's time to embrace a more compassionate approach.
Self-compassion is essential, especially in the language learning journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And there will be bumps along the way.
Speaking of bumps, are there any other common pitfalls that language learners tend to fall into?
One that comes up often is the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
I still remember the first time I tried to order coffee in French.
Yeah.
I butchered the pronunciation so badly that the barista just stared at me blankly. I wanted to crawl under a table and disappear.
It's understandable to feel self-conscious,
Yeah.
but the truth is, making mistakes is an inevitable part of the learning process.
Right.
It's how our brains figure out what works and what doesn't.
So instead of seeing mistakes as failures, we should see them as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. Every mistake is a chance to learn and improve. Okay.
And the more mistakes you make,
Yeah.
the more you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, which ultimately leads to greater fluency and confidence.
It's like that old saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Or in this case, you can't speak a new language without making a few grammatical blunders.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
And remember, native speakers make mistakes all the time.
Right?
It's part of being human.
You know, this conversation is making me realize that learning a new language is not just about mastering vocabulary and grammar. It's about developing resilience, embracing vulnerability, and learning to laugh at ourselves along the way.
Couldn't agree more. It's a journey of personal growth and discovery that extends far beyond the realm of language itself.
It's almost like learning a new language is a metaphor for life itself.
Yeah.
There are challenges to overcome, mistakes to be made, and moments of pure joy and connection along the way.
Beautifully said. And one thing that can really enhance that sense of connection is finding a community of fellow language learners. Yeah, we talked about online language exchange apps and meetups earlier, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the role of community in the learning process.
Community can be incredibly powerful. Sharing your experiences, challenges, and triumphs with others who are on the same journey can provide a sense of camaraderie, support, and accountability.
It's like having a built-in cheerleading squad, encouraging you to keep going when you're feeling discouraged. And it's also a great way to get different perspectives
Yeah,
and learn from each other's mistakes.
exactly. And sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in the struggle
Right.
can be incredibly motivating.
You know, this whole conversation is making me want to step up my English game.
Uh-huh.
I'm feeling inspired to try some of these new strategies and maybe even join a language exchange group or two.
That's fantastic. And remember, we're here to support you every step of the way.
I appreciate that. It's great to have a guide who can help navigate the sometimes overwhelming world of language learning. But before we get too carried away, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what we can do to really take our speaking skills to the next level. Any advanced strategies we should be aware of?
Well, once you've got a solid foundation, it's all about refining those skills and developing a more nuanced understanding of the language.
Right.
One strategy I often recommend is to focus on specific aspects of spoken English,
Okay.
like pronunciation,
Right.
intonation,
Yeah.
and rhythm.
I guess it's kind of like taking your English to the next level, like going from speaking fluently to sounding like a natural.
Exactly. And there are some fantastic resources out there that can help you do just that.
Oh, cool.
For example, there are websites and apps that offer interactive pronunciation exercises where you can record yourself speaking and get feedback on your accent and clarity.
That sounds incredibly helpful, especially for someone like me who tends to mumble. I've always admired people who can speak English with such effortless elegance.
It's a skill that can definitely be developed with practice. And it's not just about eliminating your accent entirely.
Right.
It's about understanding the subtle nuances of intonation and rhythm that convey meaning and emotion in spoken English.
So like learning to use your voice as an instrument,
Yeah.
emphasizing certain words, pausing at the right moments, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And one fun way to practice this is to listen to audiobooks or podcasts
Yeah.
and pay attention to how the narrator uses their voice to bring the story to life.
Okay.
You can even try mimicking their style and see how it feels.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I've always loved listening to audiobooks, but I never thought about it as a way to improve my speaking skills.
Yeah.
It's like sneaking in a pronunciation lesson while enjoying a good story.
Exactly. And speaking of stories, another powerful strategy for advanced learners is to engage with more complex and challenging content.
So instead of sticking to rom-coms and sitcoms,
Yeah.
I should be watching documentaries and listening to podcasts on astrophysics.
Well, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but the idea is to gradually expose yourself to a wider range of vocabulary, grammatical structures, and accents. You could try reading novels, watching news programs,
Yeah.
or listening to podcasts on topics that interest you.
I can see how that would be beneficial. It's like expanding your language horizons, going beyond the everyday conversational phrases and delving into more specialized areas.
And as you encounter new words and concepts, don't be afraid to look them up, write them down,
Right.
and use them in your own conversations. The more you actively engage with the language, the more it will become second nature to you.
You know, this whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on language learning. I used to think it was all about achieving fluency,
Uh-huh.
but now I'm starting to see it as a lifelong journey of discovery and growth.
I couldn't agree more. It's about constantly challenging yourself, expanding your knowledge, and refining your skills. And it's a journey that can bring immense joy, connection, and fulfillment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of English speaking, what's one piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are on this journey with us?
Embrace the process. There will be moments of frustration, confusion, and even embarrassment along the way. But those moments are all part of the learning experience, and they ultimately make the journey even more rewarding. So be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and most importantly, have fun along the way.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Connect with other learners, find resources that inspire you, and never stop exploring the incredible world of language.
It's a world full of possibilities waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.